The next mandatory Supreme Court case you need to know for the AP test is the first of the two related to gerrymandering. And this is the 1962 case of Charles Baker, who is a resident of Memphis, Tennessee, suing the state of Tennessee. Carr was like the state official from Tennessee that was named in the lawsuit. So this is sort of like the background of the dispute. In 1950, 1951, the state of Tennessee was still using 1900 census data to draw their state congressional districts. So clearly, the census population information was like way outdated by like 1950. So that's sort of the heart of the argument. One of the things that transpired was that in especially urban areas between 1900 and 1950, there was a population explosion. And a lot more people between 1900 and 1950 were living in like urban areas like Memphis. So because the population data was being used from 1900, the citizens in urban areas like Memphis were arguing that they were being discriminated against, that their vote was actually worth less than citizens that were living in rural areas. So here's the example. So in 1900, right, in the Memphis area, there was like 43,000 individuals that like lived here, and they had approximately 7.5 representatives. In the rest of the state, there was 43,000 voters, and they had 11 representatives. So this got even more of a difference between 1900 and 1950. So now in the black area, like in the Memphis area, there were now 312,000 people crowded into this area, and that would be worth about 7.5 representatives. The rest of the state had 312,000 voters, right? But like 26 representatives. So the argument was from citizens like Charles Baker that there were more of them in a district, but they had like less like representatives. So that essentially their vote was worth less than someone that lived in a rural community, that there were less of them, but they had the same amount of representation, if not more. So Baker and other citizens in urban areas were alleging that they were being discriminated against, that their vote was worth less. Tennessee argued that the Constitution was really vague on how the district should be drawn. This is really a state issue. Like the state should be able to decide however they want to draw the districts, and that state populations or state politicians could be voted out of office if they were the ones making like the districts, and the people were unhappy with the districts. Just vote those state politicians out and send a message they're not happy with the districts. If there's already a remedy in place to deal with the dispute, there was no reason for the Supreme Court to intervene in something that should just be considered a Tennessee issue. So the constitutional connection is the 14th Amendment. Why? Because the 14th Amendment, at the end of it, includes like a little clause that's called the Equal Protection Clause that basically says that no state could deny any person living within it the equal protection of the laws, meaning that everybody had to be treated equally, treated the same in the eyes of the law. Any individual in this country that is alleging discrimination, like Charles Baker was, whether it's discrimination in this case, racial discrimination, gender discrimination, you name it, they use the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause as the basis for their lawsuit, saying that they are not being treated equally, right? So the constitutional connection, what part of the Constitution relates to this case? It's the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause. All right, so what's the decision outcome? The question was, were Tennessee's districts a violation of the Equal Protection Clause? And in a 6-3 decision, the Supreme Court said yes, that the way in which these districts were drawn was unconstitutional because it put people living in like areas that had seen population surges but had not adjusted to the number of representatives they had, because you're using outdated census data, at a disadvantage. And the significance of this ruling is as follows, and this is what you're most likely to see on the AP test, this phrase. It establishes the principle of one person, one vote. That's most likely what you would see on the AP test, which of the following cases established the principle of one person, one vote. It's Baker v. Carr. And that's because essentially what it established was that these congressional legislative districts all have to roughly include the same number of people. So you don't have one area that has so many more people, but the same number of reps, than an area that has considerably less people, but the same number of reps. Thus, by making like the more rural areas have their votes worth like more, and the people living in the urban areas having their voting power like diminished because there's more of them, but the same number of representatives. So this establishes the fact one person, one vote. All of these congressional districts have to include roughly the same number of people within each district.